Hello and welcome to today's Cyber Talks on how modern forensics investigation methods prove helpful in the new digital era. To be presented by Mr. Robert Wright. I am your host Pritama I'll be your host for the day. For our attendees, the session will be on listen-only mode and will last for an hour, out of which the last 10 to 15 minutes will be dedicated to Q&A. If you have any questions during the webinar to the organizers or to the panelists, please do post them in your Q&A window. Also, if you face any audio or video challenges, please check your internet connection or log out and log into the session again. An important announcement regarding the certificate of attendance for this session. Participants need to attend the complete webinar that includes the Q&A section to qualify for the certificate of attendance. Participants should fill in the survey form in the attendees thank you mail and answer the 3 multiple choice questions based on the webinar provided with the right answers within the same day. If these 2 criteria are met, then only the participants will receive the certificate of attendance within 5 to 7 business days. Now, before we introduce today's speaker, I would like to announce that our speaker has recently written an article for PI Magazine on applying forensic fundamentals to the evolving evidence of today. So if you're interested in reading that article, please do find the downloadable PDF file in your handout section in the webinar toolbar. It will also be included in the thank you mail that you will be receiving after the session. Now a bit about our speaker. Robert B. Fried has nearly 20 years of experience performing data collections and forensic investigations of electronic evidence. He is the Senior Vice President and Global Head of Sandline Discoveries Forensic and Investigations Practice and is based out in New York. Prior to joining Sandline, Robert has held senior level positions in cyber forensics field with firms providing professional investigative services. Robert is a licensed professional investigator in both Michigan and New York and has previously worked as a computer crime specialist at the National White Collar Crime Center NW3C, where he developed and instructed computer forensic and investigative training courses for federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies throughout the United States. Robert has a BS and MS in forensic science from the University of New Haven and additionally holds and actively maintains industry certifications and is a member of EC Council's Global Advisory Board. And without further delay, I'm giving over the session to Robert to start with the webinar.
Hello, everyone. We're going to talk today about how modern forensics investigation methods prove helpful in the new digital age. If you think about it, we're so ingrained in our daily lives with technology that it's no wonder that virtually every investigation that we encounter involves some form of electronic evidence, be it computers and mobile devices, Apple Watches, anything that you can potentially use may hold evidence that is useful in an investigation. There are different types of investigations that we encounter in the digital forensic space. However, the most common that we typically see, especially on my side, being a e-discovery digital forensics practitioner, we encounter matters related to theft of intellectual property, where somebody is suspected of potentially taking information, documents, files, software code, etc., with them to a new employer. Several accident investigations come up recently, and they're always a little sensitive depending on the nature of the accident, but you could have anything related to, automobile accidents, situations where the victim has passed away, things like that, and even, other accidents that happen more of an industrial sense as well. These also come up. Harassment cases, and you'll see a little bit of talk about that in social media investigations that we'll raise a little while from now. But employer cases where there's employees that are harassing one another, things of that nature. Then we also encounter spoliation type of cases, where there's a potential where data that was supposed to be preserved during the course of an investigation or litigation that is no longer available, or there's questions about it. So we get involved with that as well. And then always interesting to come across document authentication cases where you're comparing whether or not two documents are the same, what are the potential changes that occurred between the documents, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a wide range of cases. I'm sharing with you some of the more common cases that I've come across during the course of my career. When you think about the evidence that we encounter today, this has shifted. In the earlier days of digital forensics data collections, we would encounter computers, we would encounter network shares, we would encounter email, obviously. Now, there's a focus on other data sources, such as mobile devices. And I read a statistic that mobile devices are at times more than 60% part of e-discovery cases now. And so they're gaining more and more relevance, if not very relevant to matters. Cloud data is also relatively important these days because people save locally to their devices, but local storage is limited. So cloud data allows the opportunity to save more data somewhere else, and also not have the limitations at times because certain cloud storage providers provide terabytes worth of storage now. Social media is also a very popular and prevalent data source as we start encountering more and more investigations where this data source could prove helpful. Website captures, seeing how websites have changed over the course of time, what content is on websites, in terms of whether or not there's any type of information from one website that looks like a competitor's website. It's very interesting there, and the ability to scrape and preserve the websites and produce them for our clients is a relatively frequent request now. Wearables are also important. They tend to give information that potentially could be useful, so there's something to keep in mind. In the past, I've done investigations where sort of like the early editions of like the Fitbit, tracking activities was done, and I questioned, what the relevance was of that at the time, not knowing that they would obviously become more and more popular with the Apple Watches and whatnot. So the wearables are obviously something that people are using and potentially could contain data of evidentiary value. IoT or Internet of Things, in terms of our connected homes, what we have access to, what we connect to the digital world, and the information that gets stored up there. So, for example, I have a garage door that's connected to my Wi-Fi, the lights in my house, cameras in the home. TVs, like many of you, game systems, everything that we can think of is now on the internet and can store data. And how do we get to that data? Cryptocurrency, you may be following a lot of what's out there now. And cryptocurrency is taking a lot of interest, and people are starting to learn more about it and how the digital wallets work and how the exchanges work, et cetera, as well as the dark web. Many of us, have seen different types of news posts and cases revolving around the dark web and the information that's up there and available, and how that can be used in investigation as well. So this is really our new norm. There are other data sources, obviously, but I wanted to really just highlight some of the more recent ones and frequent ones that we're being asked to look into these days. So, like I mentioned, these data sources have the potential of holding information, and it's really about understanding key actors or key individuals and their relationship to one another. So looking at communication that may be on these devices, looking at timelines of events and corroborating the information that maybe we had figured out through the course of interviews of people. Now looking at the data and how that's related as well. It's also very important to consider all data sources. And then obviously, looking at if there's any other data that's stored on these devices, files and documents that may be of an evidentiary value to your case. It's all a potential, and you really don't want to leave any stones unturned if you have access to the device or devices. There's really an evolving landscape that's developing now with electronic evidence, and you have the ability to look at local data sources as well as cloud-based storage as well. Now, the local devices, due to limitations on size, like I mentioned before, may not have all the data that you are interested in. So sometimes the data gets saved, other times it gets saved elsewhere. And it's important to understand, number one, what type of data is of interest and how that particular provider stores their information. Can you archive the data to your cloud service, for example? Can you keep your posts local on the device? These are all things that you need to work, obviously, with a data collection specialist or a forensic investigator to get more insight on. Now, just an average individual who may be familiar with these types of storage, features and functions, that's great to know in the background, but it's really about preserving this information in the most efficient and defensible manner. So, when you encounter a scene where you have both electronic evidence and other evidence, for the electronic evidence, I encourage you to look around and be observant. In fact, if we're talking about the key characteristics of a forensic investigator in terms of being a successful investigator, you have to look around. You have to see beyond sometimes what's in front of you, and the way that you do that is just look around and see things that may be in plain view. So if you don't necessarily see a computer or a device that stores data in front of you, perhaps you see data cords or cables. There may be some accessories nearby within plain view. There's also the potential of seeing if there's Wi-Fi networks active. So you may walk into an environment that has no technology right in front of you, but there's a Wi-Fi network, and that piques interest as well. So be observant. That's really key in your investigations, as you can't always just expect to see everything right before you sometimes. In terms of physical evidence, that's also important because if you look at the electronic data that's on a device, that's one thing, right? That's data that's stored on the device. How about the device itself? What about the fingerprints that are on that device, or the potential fluids that are on that device that may have DNA on the screen, for example, or just on the device itself? You have to consider that as well, especially when you're talking about an investigation, because although you may have data that's particularly helpful to your investigation, you're also going to have other potential information that is on there that will help tie the various types of evidence or facts or other information related to the case. And then there's other type of physical evidence that's potentially available as well. And most of the time people sit in offices and we have computers, probably have about 5 or 6 computers with me in my office now, but I'm surrounded by papers as well and post-it notes. And a lot of times those papers have important, information on there. Some people put their passwords on there. They put other information, and that could potentially be useful to an investigation. A good example also is seed phrase, information where you may be able to see information related to gaining access to a cryptocurrency wallet and some of the cryptocurrency information that's available as well. In terms of preserving this evidence, you want to use tools and methodologies that are obviously defensible and efficient. And you want to see, number one, based on the evidence that you've identified, is there a tool out there to help preserve this in that way? It's good to have the tool that's compatible. It's even better to have additional tools if possible. That allows you to ensure compatibility whenever you're asked to do a preservation or you need to do one. It also allows you to do a comparison of the data that's available between the two tools. So due to the way that one tool parses data compared to another, you may get more or less information. And it's always good to compare because you never know, number one, what the true result is going to be until you run it. And you may be surprised and it may be beneficial. There's a constant update and, there's constant change. The industry is very dynamic. So we can't always be sure that the one tool that we're comfortable with or we know has worked in the past will always work this time around. And there's also commercial tools that you should be aware of and keep an open mind to. Those commercial tools may need to be used because the forensic tools may not be able to give you or parse the information in a way that you need. Obviously, you'd want to do some validation on those tools and understand how that information is being extracted and represented. So that's up to you as the investigator to do so. You also may need to develop your own solutions. Be innovative. That's also very important to be an investigator because you have to keep a creative mindset and an open mind. Just know that if you're going to develop any methodologies or solutions, which is possible, you go through a validation process. You prove that what's supposed to happen happens, and you take the proper steps to document the process and reproduce it and make sure that it can be vetted by other examiners. And of course, if the tool or tools that you have at your disposal are not able to do what you need to have done in a reasonable time, a manual effort may need to be undertaken to be able to obtain information from the device. And that could be through photography, through screenshots, through transcription, for example. So all these different aspects come into play looking at the compatibility of your tools and what's the best tool to use for the situation at hand. You also may need to ask data custodians, IT people, members of the legal team, if the data that you need to preserve is available. And that, may not be immediately the case. You may need to get access to it. You may need to speak to people about where specific data is located. And the best way to do that is to talk to people. So interviewing skills are also very important as an investigator to get information related to your case. Now, there's sometimes some burden that goes into getting all this together, and people being on a schedule to be somewhere, and we're a very fluid, industry right now, and we're a very fluid world. We have to accommodate to what's going on. So more recently, we've seen, obviously due to the pandemic and for other reasons, an interest in moving forward with remote data collections. And this, is very important because people, want to be able to comply with the obligations of courts and corporations and whatnot, but we have to do so in the most conscientious manner due to the health concerns and safety of others. And so this has become more and more prevalent. And to be honest with you, remote data collections have been used for many, many years, and it's just now becoming more in the forefront due to the pandemic. The question also, in addition to devices being available for data collection, can accounts be available as well? Information related to the accounts may be needed to be provided, such as passwords and verification codes. So if you have two-factor enabled, that's also very important. And like I just said, being able to obtain passwords and passcodes and 2FA may be something that the data custodian would be able to provide you, but also the IT team may be able to provide based on who's managing and has access to the account. There's also the potential of encryption being on devices, and more we're seeing that to be the case. So you may need to work with IT to be able to get access to the decryption keys or information so that you can access the data on the device. MDM policies are also in play potentially, and you may need to relax those policies in order to gain access to the data. And also keep in mind that some accounts that may be available to you, that's great that they are, but are you going to be able to log into the accounts and see the private content that's out there as well? That's something to consider, because somebody may give you their account handle or username, but then to actually see content that they're posting, you would need their username and password to access the account. Something also that's relatively interesting, and you may have seen some news stories about it, is ephemeral data. So you have the ability now to chat with others using apps such as Snapchat, and after a certain period of time, your data is no longer there. So, another topic and consideration when you're doing, these preservations is the availability of the data, because there's time sensitivity involved sometimes with the data source. And so you just have to be aware and take proper procedures, develop workflows to make sure that you get access to all the available data that's out there. It's also important to take into consideration any laws and policies that may be relevant. Now, there are certain laws that are federal, are state, so you have to be aware of how that impacts your ability to not only preserve the data, but investigate data. So, for example, in the EU and the UK, we have GDPR. We have here in the US the California ECPA, which protects some information related to electronic devices and other electronic data. And then one that you may hear a lot about, even through your own employers, is BYOD, bring your own device. And so corporations are now allowing individuals to utilize personal devices and accounts and whatnot for corporate use, and how that comes into play. And I've seen many situations even this week where the discussion needs to take place about what information is relevant, what information is private, personal. And so all these things are very important to consider when doing investigations and even obviously preserving data. And then People's Republic of China, state secret laws are applicable there, and you have to be very cautious about how you go about not only collecting but investigating and reviewing the data. So that's also very important. Can you perform a full capture of the device or the account, or is it the case that you can only produce or generate a targeted preservation, or only look at certain information? So all these things are very important to consider because you may need context to other information, and that may or may not be really available based on what you're able to collect and investigate. So there are a lot of tools that are available on the market. There's so much that's been kind of happening in the industry. There's a lot of great products and great thought leadership, and the industry speaks relatively frequently, and we get some good products as a result. But I think it's very important, and I want to stress this, that although many tools are out there and they can kind of get you the information that you need, it's important to understand what's going on under the hood. So although you may have products that say, we're going to get you all the internet history, we're going to parse out the registry for you, we're going to give you information related to log analysis, that's great. And that's particularly useful for very time-sensitive matters. But to understand where these tools are pulling from, the source locations, how they're being able to interpret this, and potential limitations are very important for you as an examiner to understand. There are tools that operate on a GUI interface or a command interface, command line. Either way, you have to know how to navigate and use the tool for the best of what you need it to do. And there's other tools that parse out the different types of file systems and operating system artifacts, and they run scripts and different types of commands and tasks. And so you really have to understand, again, what these tools are doing and the information that's going to be available to you. So, like I had mentioned, there's a lot of these automated types of scripts that are either available or that you could develop to give you information about the various categories or buckets of information that are available. And, it's very useful to have this. And, once you obtain this, you have to start figuring out what's relevant to your investigation. You have to start thinking it through, what's going to be important to present and extract from with all this information now at your disposal. There's different ways to do this, with some of the more e-discovery types of tools as well beyond the forensic tools. And some of that, involves, data analytics or, the ability to look at clustering of document clustering, threading, for example, looking at text messages. That's a very big topic and feature request that comes out a lot now, with some of the tools that we use and in the e-discovery space, pulling it all together, making it easy for review. And, understanding not only, what's in the data, but, who's talking to each other and showing relationships. And so, that comes into play with not only the people, but the devices and the different accounts that people use as well. It's also important to know that a lot of this is happening now that allow us to do investigations from a remote location and access data centrally on a network. Many of the forensic workstations that we use may be virtual. The repositories can be cloud-based in certain scenarios, and everybody can tap into these various environments and use all sorts of methods to not only analyze the data, but even collaborate with each other and their clients now. So it's really come a long way, and it's a really great time to be an investigator because of all the different tools and collaboration that can take place as a result. The time's really of the essence in a lot of investigations. In terms of information you're able to gather and what you can communicate to your clients, you want to take a look at producing and providing information in the most, reasonable time period, and that may mean using electronic transfer technologies such as SFTP, or even sharing of files using secure file sharing as well. And being able to provide that information in a very short period of time, and even if that's not only just results but exports, the ability to realize that it's important to kind of move swiftly. Obviously, make sure that everything is good in terms of your investigation and you're ready to communicate, but you want to communicate frequently because an investigation is really an important situation for a client. They're engaging us for a reason, and they want to know that in the background things are happening. They're constantly happening. So picking up the phone, sending out an email is always a great idea. And also video chats. I've done a lot of web meetings, sharing of screens, talking through the findings, and making sure that everybody's understanding and aware of where we are in the investigation. But just like I said, providing results and information is useful. You want to have a consultative approach in doing so. You want to be clear, concise, to the point, direct. It's very important because if you are just giving spreadsheets, if you're just giving a wealth of information or data, that individual who's on the other side, your client, may not know how to interpret that data, may not know what the true value of that data is. So giving them an understanding from your perspective, what's out there, and what you're finding, and being able to give them insight and potential guidance and direction based on what you're seeing and based on your experience is particularly helpful. You do always want to be objective in doing so, giving sound rationale as to why certain things are standing out. And so work closely with your client, with stakeholders to just make sure everybody is on the same page and that the investigation is going the way that you anticipate, and that everybody's getting information in the most timely and objective way. In terms of talking technical, I actually speak on this subject pretty frequently now. Using analogies whenever possible is helpful because we all have a different take on technology and understanding of technology. So it's really important to know your audience, know what the scope and the objective of the investigation is, and be able to relate it to people so that they understand next steps and they can relate to it however they need to. The field of digital forensics is continuously evolving. We have data sources and volumes that are increasing daily. I just picked up a 4 terabyte thumb drive, and the cost on that was relatively inexpensive, which means that we're going to have more and more ability to save data and for data to be out there, that may be relevant to a matter. So your understanding as to storage capacities and the type of functionality that these devices allow, and the fact that it's out there and it's pretty prevalent now is something to be aware of and to embrace. The same investigative techniques that we use and have used for computers and network and email and even forensic evidence that we encounter, like fingerprints and DNA. We have methodologies that have been around for many years and have adjusted and sometimes not because they don't need to make sure that we're documenting well, we're doing the right thing by making sure that we're protecting the integrity of the evidence that we're collecting, and that ultimately it's going to be useful for not only your investigation, but also to present in court. And at the end of the day, an investigation is also about reconstructing a timeline of events. So be it physical evidence, electronic evidence, the investigator's job, the investigator's role is to help piece back what happened and explain to those who need an explanation how this occurred and how they drew that conclusion. So the characteristics for success. And I have a recent article out in PI magazine that got released, and it discusses modern day investigations and forensic evidence. And this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart because I did study forensics and investigations both in undergrad and my grad work. But in terms of success and the way that I've seen success in my own career, I've made it a conscious effort to stay updated in my field, in my other areas of particular interest. I like to stay current and engage with others in the field. At the moment, now I'm getting more and more involved in cryptocurrency investigations, and that's just a personal interest, but you have to have the interest, the passion, desire to stay updated in your field, in your area of expertise. And that's done either through reading, engaging with others in industry organizations, reading publications, attending trainings or industry events. Even now with COVID, many of them are virtual, such as this. Another important characteristic is to document. And when I say document, I mean it because, in terms of understanding what you did, that's important. But what you did a year ago is even more important to have down in some form of documentation because we, need to make sure that everything is done in a specific way, number one, and number two, that we can always remember or recollect the facts of that particular time period where you're either doing your preservation efforts or your investigations. So engage in documentation and it will be helpful whether or not it's in by way of photography or video or audio, and even just writing down as well, transcribing. It's all very important. And then I can't stress enough the need to maintain a good network of experts. You may be the expert in your company or your department for one aspect of, let's say, digital forensics. You may focus in on data destruction. There may be another examiner who's terrific on social media investigations. There are many different cryptocurrency experts that I'm engaging with at this time to become familiar. But know what you're good at, build on that, and then also seek out other professionals and experts and seasoned practitioners to understand how they may be able to assist, because this is a small industry. We're all doing this, and sometimes we need to reach out to others and realize that it's okay to not have all the information, and it's even better to reach out and get information and insight from those who may be focused more in another topic or subject matter than you on an everyday basis. I want to thank you for your time today. And now we're going to open up for questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. That was a really insightful and informative session. And this was a very interesting webinar. Robert, can I just, yeah, your video just stopped. Can you just, yeah, thank you. Yes, we can see you on video now. Great. So we will start with the Q&A session, and thank you so much for such an amazing presentation. I hope this was worth our audience's time because our question box is just flooded with a lot of questions. They are all waiting to ask a lot of questions to you. But before we go forward with the Q&A, I would like to say that today's session is in sync with EC Council's CHFI programs. EC Council CHFI program maps to the forensic investigator and the consultant digital forensics role. Anyone with a CHFI certification is eligible for 4,000 plus job vacancies globally with an average salary of $95,000 per annum. So if you are interested to learn more about this program, kindly take part in the poll that will be on your screen right now. And let us know your preferred mode of training. Okay, so Robert, can we start with the Q&A?
Absolutely.
Hello?
Yes,
Okay,
can you hear me?
So let's start with the first question that I can ask. Yes, I can hear you. Okay, so let's start with the first question. Okay. If we don't have a cloud user ID or password, then company providers data or a data of any person who has been murdered can how to break the password protected by mobile or bypass them.
So I can answer that based on a civilian side. I work for a consulting organization, and we need legal authority to be able to gain access to the account. Law enforcement's a little bit different. Even if I see the password out there, I still want to ask for permission to access the account. Perhaps that's next of kin. So if you look at it from a private sector standpoint or a private investigator standpoint, there are many types of cases that come up where somebody is deceased, they have a phone that they can't get access to, accounts that they can't get access to. Sometimes these are cached on the local devices in vaults or in even plain text. There are advanced solutions out by organizations now that try and attempt to unlock the device. Just want to put some disclosure out there that you do need a subpoena, a court order, or legal permission. So you have to go through those channels as well to gain access to that information. So there is, some information that you have to work together with legal counsel and make sure that you not only have the right to gain access to the account, but the person who is requesting your services also has ownerships or rights as well.
Thank you so much, Robert. So, Robert, the next question is by Aaron. What are your thoughts on new challenges with recovering deleted data? Is it getting more difficult to obtain deleted data? Technology seems to be moving to a true delete process.
Yeah, that's a great question. The technology that we have today is on flash memory, and the devices and the file systems, they clean up really well. So the ability to recover deleted data may be somewhat hindered, I should say. And there should never be a guarantee whenever you're taking on projects and somebody wants you to do attempted recovery of information. You always want to set the expectation that it is possible, but there is no guarantee. I'm going to make a best effort. Again, these technologies are meant to kind of allow you to do efficient deletions. There's also data destruction tools that are readily available. We do these types of tools. There are algorithms that we look for. So for example, some data destruction tools may take a hotdoc.com and change it to system.dll so that it makes it look like a system-based file. So from a forensic investigator, we also look for patterns of things that have been renamed or even the dates and times of files. So for example, you may have a file that gets reset to 1990, and there may be scores of those files. So if you see patterns and algorithms, those can be a telling sign to an investigator, a trained investigator, that something may be going on here. And then we also look at the free space, the unallocated space, to see if there's any remnants potentially to do some data carving to recover deleted data.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert. Robert, the next question is by Raghav. Is it necessary for a forensic investigator to use his own tools or any kind of paid tools? Can he or she use free tools or like someone else's tools or something?
So that's a great question too. I appreciate all these questions that are coming in. So like I said, it's really important to be innovative now. There are a lot of our clients and specifically legal teams out there that are invested in technology in-house. So we have to work together with each other and become innovative. And that means creation and maybe modification of tools to be able to look at data a certain way. From an investigator standpoint, that's absolutely fine to look for ways to be innovative on your own. Know that you should individually and your team should validate the tools, okay? A lot of people come out with great tools, and it's also about getting the market presence and getting the industry to recognize your tool. But what happens over time is a tool becomes popular because people are validating it. It's doing what it's supposed to be doing, what it says it should be doing. But just to create a tool and not test it and not take the proper measures to document it before usage on real evidence, I would say steer away from that. There are a lot of great tools in the marketplace. One of the key factors that you go with a forensically vetted tool like specific acquisition or investigation tool is that not only have these been vetted by other examiners, they're in discussion boards, but they've also been put into question in court and stood up in court. And so there is case law that mentions these tools, and you can also look to see if that's also out there for you to reference when you're making your decisions to purchase these tools. Know that there are many alternatives out there, and it's always good to have a more diversified toolbox to be able to choose a product and solution that's best for your case. Don't just always rely on the de facto tool that you have. Look to see other ways of looking at the same data to compare what each data or each product is giving you as a result.
Thank you, Robert. Robert, the next question is by Chintan, and he's saying, can you substantiate what does it mean to have a consultative approach for the results of an analysis or investigation? What does it really mean to export the information from the tool?
Yeah, I think the consultative approach is something that a lot of people are now focusing in on. We're dealing with tremendous volumes of data at the moment, and for the examiner or the the service provider to simply export out spreadsheets and loads of information and here you are, client, let me give you this information. This is what you asked for. I think it would be beneficial from the examiner standpoint, from the investigator, from the service provider standpoint, to have a look at the data and come back with some suggestions or recommendations based on the data that you see. I think that has always been a winning thing that I have done, my teams have done. To get on the phone, pick up the phone, get on web cameras like this now, go through the reports, go through the results. How does this help your case? What else can we do? If you're not seeing that these results I'm explaining to you are what you need, let's see where our next step is. That is going to be a win-win situation for everybody, and that's what makes that rapport so great with that client.
Thank you, Robert. Robert, the next question is by Jumerin, and he asks, producing electronic records and storing them are extremely costly. Do you think extremely costly? So can you just let us know a bit about this?
You're saying to store records is very costly?
Yes, I think that he's saying that producing electronic records and storing them is a very extremely costly process, and he's asking for your thoughts on this.
Yeah, look, like I said, I have picked up a 4 terabyte drive for about $30, and that's the way that it's going right now is the storage is relatively inexpensive. So people have the ability to save more and more. The amount of documents and emails that we're generating, we're talking about, in the billions as a society. So that's compounding when you have to do a investigation and or e-discovery matter. Think smart, have retention policies in place, consult with your legal teams to discuss the best way to hold on to data. If you're an organization that is more frequently encountering litigation, engage in these discussions early on. Don't wait for a litigation matter to occur and then have to deal with the volume of records. If you're an organization that's been around 40 years and you're still doing the same process of backing up and backing up and backing up, and you're paying organizations to store your backup tapes or your data, think about how best to clean up. There are a lot of organizations that house a lot of data too. Think about how long this matter had been going on for, how long does it need to be retained in your language for your statement of work. Make sure that that's explained, give your clients options, but also approach the data that you need to preserve and examine in a very strategic manner. Look at the structure of the data, look at what data is really applicable out there and what truly needs archiving versus what doesn't. And then before you do any deletion, check it out with both an internal and outside counsel to make sure that you're allowing the business to continue, but you're also taking measures to make sure that from a business standpoint, you're not storing an overly burdensome amount of data should you have to one day look at it or examine it.
Okay, and this will be the last question for the evening. Can we use our own methodology for extracting some of the evidence while working on a case or something?
Can you use your own methodology? As long as you test that methodology and you validate it, I would encourage each of you who may not understand the full concept of validation to look at that process, and feel free to reach out to me after. But there should be a certain number of processes and steps that you take to make sure that that software that you're putting into place, or that tool that you're putting into place, or that method is working the way it should. So if you want to copy file A to copy, copy file A to a location, and you want to see if the metadata of that file has changed, okay? It's a simple way to look at it from before the copy. So do a copy from before, and then do a copy after, or do a you can do a examination before and do an examination after, and then compare the results and see what has changed in that method or process that you've done.
Thank you so much, Robert. It was again a very, very informative and a really good session. And thank you to all our attendees for attending this session and for all the questions. It was a pleasure having you with us. All those who have taken part in the poll, our concerned persons will get in touch with you. And with this, we have reached the end of the session. You all may disconnect your line. Thank you so much, Robert.
Thank you.